It starts off with Sanders' rereading of first century Judaism in his book in 1977, Paul and Palestinian Judaism, which actually should have been called Palestinian Judaism brackets and Paul, because it's mostly about Palestinian Judaism, and the Paul section isn't very convincing. But his main thing there is to say that the reading of Judaism from within a Lutheran perspective has been severely misleading, because the Lutheran emphasis has been for centuries to see Judaism in the same way that Lutheranism had seen late medieval Catholicism, as a sort of Pelagianism, a self-help religion, a religion which says if you do this and this and this, then you will go to heaven, or at least get out of purgatory quicker, or whatever. And in fact, Judaism wasn't at all like that. And Sanders made a very, very strong case for saying that underneath all the commandments in the rabbis and so on lay a strong sense of the covenant, that God had established the covenant with Israel, and the reason that you did all these things was not to earn your status of covenant member, but to express and give thanks to God for that status. And then, of course, the Lutheran ought to say, well, that's why I myself live a moral Christian life, not in order to earn my salvation, but as a third use of the law or whatever, to keep the law out of gratitude and out of love and as an expression of faith, not as a way of earning anything. If Paul isn't complaining about works righteousness in the Pelagian sense, then what is the problem in Galatians with works of the law? This ties in, for me, with the question of the more recent study of first century Judaism in books like that one edited by Carson and others on variegated nomism, because there is in fact only one passage known to us in the whole of Second Temple literature which deals with works of the law, the Hebrew phrase ma'aseh haTorah, which would correspond to the Greek ergonomou, and that is in the scroll from the Dead Sea Scrolls known as 4QMMT, which is 4Q means it comes from K4, MMT it stands for Miktzat Ma'aseh HaTorah, which is a selection of works of the law. That's very interesting. What's going on in that scroll? How does it relate to Galatians and so on? What's going on in the scroll is that it's a letter from some leaders, probably at Qumran, to some people who are still working in the temple in Jerusalem, who the Qumranites are hoping to influence. And what it's basically saying is, God is doing his new thing, the new covenant, Deuteronomy 30, the prediction of the new covenant, is being fulfilled in us. And if you want to be one of the people who will be seen to be in the right on the last day, at the end of the days, ba'acharit hayamim, then by keeping this selection of works of Torah in the present, this will mark you out right now as somebody who will be thus vindicated in the future. Now that's fascinating, because it's exactly the same in shape as Paul's doctrine of justification. It's looking ahead to who God is going to justify in the future, and it's saying you'll be marked out in the present in this way. But for the MMT authors, this is an intra-Jewish debate, in that it's assumed that most Jews are not going to be among those who will inherit the age to come. So these particular works of the Torah are the ones that will mark you out as a special Jew. So the works of the Torah that he has in mind are not Sabbath and food laws and circumcision. Those are the things that mark out a Jew from their Gentile neighbours. The works of the Torah he has in mind are special regulations about practices in the temple, which he says these will mark you out as a true Jew over against other Jews in the present. Now, in Galatians, Paul is facing a parallel situation, but it's not about one group of Jews and another group of Jews. It's about some people who've come from James and are persuading Peter and Barnabas in Antioch, and then a similar lot of Jewish missionaries, we assume, or local Jews in Galatia itself, who are saying, if you want to be among the people of God on the last day, you've really got to be a Jew. And that means you've got to be marked out in the present by Sabbath, food laws, and particularly, because you're a bunch of uncircumcised Gentiles, by circumcision. And Paul is saying, no, the thing that marks out God's people in the present is not works of Torah, it is pistis Christou, the faithfulness of Jesus the Messiah and our faith in Jesus the Messiah. That distinction is a whole other ballgame. And this marks out in the present the ones who will be vindicated in the future. So the works of the law, and this is where I'm totally with Jimmy Dunn, the works of the law that he has in mind are the works which would separate the Jew from the Gentile, not the works which, the good moral works which you might think to do to earn righteousness as a badge of good morality. And you can see this in Galatians in that the issue is circumcision. Now, the point about circumcision is that it marks out this family. Circumcision was never like not committing adultery or something, a piece of moralism, nor, and this has been very prevalent in Protestantism, nor is it a matter of that circumcision is something outward and what you need is in the heart. That is a point Paul makes in Romans 2, but that's not what's at issue in Galatians 3 and the other passages there. It's related, but it's not the central thing. So what we have to do is take a long step back from the way that we've normally read Paul in this way and say, actually, let's read Paul historically, in a way which makes sense historically, and we'll find all sorts of meanings which were sitting there which we'd never seen before.
What the New Perspective was doing, from my perspective, is saying that the traditional view, the Lutheran view particularly, has unfortunately rather dumbed down Judaism. There's been almost an anti-Semitic slant to it, of accusing Jews of the first century Jews of legalism and narrow bigotry and all that kind of thing. And secondly, that it has missed an important dimension of Paul's teaching. Paul's teaching begins, its first formulation comes out of his mission to Gentiles, and his concern is that that his fellow Jews have narrowed the grace of God by putting too many Jewish blinkers on it, as you might say, insisting that you've got to be circumcised and you've got to, in effect, become a proselyte, become a Jew, in order to experience the grace of God. And Paul is saying, no, the grace of God is not to be narrowed like that. And that's been his main thrust. Now, that's been heard as saying Luther got it wrong. That's not what it was saying. What the New Perspective was saying is that Luther missed this dimension, and while emphasizing quite justifiably the fundamental issue that nobody can earn salvation and so on, he has missed the corporate, the social, the ethnic, the racial dimension to it, and there's been a lot of denigration of Judaism in the process. So the New Perspective is saying, let's stop denigrating Judaism, because Paul certainly didn't do it and Jesus didn't do it, and let's recognize that there is this dimension that the grace of God can be narrowly circumscribed by racial, by national ideologies and so on, and that is against justification by faith. We in the 19th century, in the Victorian missionary era, constricted the grace of God quite as much as Second Temple Judaism did. One could say American imperialism today is constricting the grace of God in quite the same way as well. So I think there's a case an argument to be had on this point, because there's a dimension which has been missed or misunderstood, and it needs to be brought back.
Hope in the Word is a richly illustrated timeline that explores the story of Christian origins and the background to New Testament faith from 400 BC to 400 AD. It is both interactive and multimedia. By clicking on an active item, a page will appear with further information, often featuring video footage of expert commentary on that area.
To a couple of places, Jesus saying, render unto Caesar and render unto God, and then Paul saying,
Augustus gave to Herod a small port called Strato's
But in addition
Tower.
to these multimedia resources, this timeline has another dimension to it. if at the bottom left-hand corner of each page you press the button entitled Themes and Movements, many of the theological and philosophical trends of that period will appear. Again, some are interactive, revealing more multimedia resources. The layout of this timeline is not complex. At the top of each page, historical and cultural milestones are listed, and at the bottom, chronologically parallel theological works and events are found. So overall, as you can see, there is so much to explore and discover in this illustrated, interactive and multimedia timeline of the fascinating relationship between Christian origins and New Testament background.